MJ on the journey back to Silicon Valley. Welcome to part 1 of the React from Scratch tutorial. Next up are React components. So what components are, they're independent pieces of code that you can reuse through your application. And they serve the same purpose as JavaScript functions. And components come in two types: class-based components and function components. Throughout the tutorial, we will always be looking at both class components as well as function components, and we will always be starting with class components first. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The first thing I want you to think about is think of React components as HTML divs that are on steroids. So just keep that in mind. If you're familiar with HTML, they're basically divs that have way more capability than the normal divs you are used to. So just keep that in mind for now. Guys, so let's go ahead and jump back into our code. So we are in app.js, which is our main. Let me just have this window here float on top. Okay, that's fine. So this is our main application, and this is also our main and first component, the app component. And this is the bare minimum syntax you need to have in order to have a class-based component. Okay, so what we gotta do, we gotta render a developer profile on the page. Since we are all developers, I thought that would be something that is relevant. So I'm gonna build out a developer profile, basically a landing page for a developer. So the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna go about building this the same way we would build an HTML site, okay? So the first thing we're gonna do is drop a code snippet here that's gonna have an image and an h1 tag. So this is your regular HTML syntax. This is an image that has an alt. It's class name of profile pic. I've already added some CSS. The code for all the tutorial is going to be available on GitHub. So I've added already some CSS to the app.css file here. So yeah, let's move on with this. Okay, so image and h1 tag. Okay. Let's go ahead and save just to take a look at how this thing looks on the screen. And let's go ahead and bring up our app. So here it is. So it's rendering an image and then in h1 to the screen. The next thing, we're going to put a description, which is going to be in an h4 tag. And we're going to put an about title. That is going to be in an h3 tag, and then under that we're going to put a content about the about section, which is going to be a paragraph, and we're going to put a title that says tech stack, which is the tech stack that this particular developer is using. And under that, we would put a list, a UL, with those particular technologies. And let's go ahead and save this. And here it is. We have our landing page for a developer. It probably needs some more CSS on the right and left, but it looks good enough. Now, we are rendering this entire thing that we're seeing on the screen on one component. So I think by now that you can pretty much easily see how we can build an entire site just with our app component. So we can put all of our HTML in here and just render the app component as our site or application. But that is usually not how it's done in React. The purpose of this app component is to be the parent component, the top component that contains all other components of our application. So usually in React applications, what you will have in here, you don't have any HTML outlined like this. You will have actually components. And the app component is the component that renders all other components, if you will. So what we want to do next is actually create a component that contains our dev profile HTML elements, and then render that component in the app versus building our entire. We can build our entire site this way, but that is not the way it is done in React. So the next thing we want to do, guys, is go ahead and open up our source folder. And in source folder, we're going to create a new component, and we're going to call it dev profile.js. And in here, we're going to create a class-based component called dev profile. The first thing we want to do is import React and component. And then in here, we're going to do class-based, class dev profile extends component. In here, we always need our render method. And then in the render method, we're going to return a div, and then inside our div we're gonna put all the HTML that we've used earlier in our app.js. So let's go inside app.js and then pick up all the HTML that's inside the div. And then we're going to drop it in here. Now, in our app.js, instead of having all the HTML here, we're simply going to have dev profile, the component we just created. So in app.js, we simply gonna render this component right here. And now if we save, the app will break. It's gonna say dev profile is not defined. It's not defined because, for one, we have not saved this file. The other thing, we have not imported dev profile into our app, so we need to import it. So we're gonna do import dev profile from dev profile. And now if we save, we don't have a export. We need to export the dev profile component. Export default dev profile. And now if we save, we see our landing page. So this is the correct way to write components in React. So basically our app.js is simply responsible for containing all the other components that make up our application. In this particular case, what we want to render, or our site or our application, if you will, is this landing page of a dev profile. So we simply render the component here, and then we put all our HTML, anything related to the component, in its own JS file. This will also contain all our logic. Any logic that you need to perform that is related to the dev profile also will be in this file. And that is what's powerful about React. So it has all the HTML and all of the logic needed within one component. And that is why I called it earlier HTML divs that are on steroids. So it's basically, think of it as an HTML div that contains not only the HTML that you need to render to the page, but it contains the logic that is related to that particular div. So that's basically components in a nutshell, guys. Next, we're going to be looking at state. And the reason we need to be looking at state, it's because usually when you are building React applications, you have to be fetching data from somewhere. You need to be pulling whatever data that you're showing on the screen is being pulled dynamically from somewhere. And for you to pull data dynamically from somewhere, you need a way to keep track of what is that data now. Does it need to be changed? Does it not need to be changed? And state takes care of that. So that's what we're going to be looking at next. So for example, why would we need to keep track of state in a landing page? It's just a simple landing page. Why would we need to keep track of state? Okay, so basically think about it this way. Let's say that this particular developer has just signed on into a site, right? They went to a form somewhere online and actually filled out this information. And this information was captured by that form, and now it's coming into the application, right? Now, when it's coming into the application, at the moment we have hard-coded all of this. So we wrote it by hand. But usually in a React application, all this information here, the application is getting it from somewhere. In this particular case, it could be a sign-in. So the person has just signed in and they have entered this information into the form. So in our dev profile here, we're going to add state. And state is that information that's coming in. So think about now, all this information about this particular developer is coming in from the sign-in. So inside here, we're going to create our constructor. And that's something you remember from the part 0 of this tutorial. So our constructor here, let's go ahead. I think this is going to give it to us here. The constructor takes props. And inside the constructor, we always call these super props, which enables inheritance from the parent component. So in here we call props. And then the next thing we're going to do is set our state. And the way you set state, you go this dot state equals a particular object or an array, depending on the data structure that you have. So in here, we're going to set our state. And what we want to do is these values that we see here, whether it's the first name and last name, the description, the about, all of these, and the text stack, all of these are going to be coming in from wherever we signed in. So it's going to be coming in dynamically. So instead of it being hard-coded here, we're going to put it into our state. So inside our state, we're going to create the following. What we see on the page is what? We have a profile image, we have name, description, about, and the text stack. So these have to be defined in state, then we will pull them from the state into our application and render them on the screen. So let's go ahead and drop all the information that's coming in about this developer from our sign-in form. So here we have the profile pic, which is a link to the source of that picture on the internet. You can also use local images. We have the name property, which contains the name, the first and last name. We have the description that contains the description about this particular developer. And then we have the about section, which will contain the about content. And then the stack, which is, as you can see here, it's an array of values. And then in here, instead of rendering hard-coded values, here we're simply going to do this dot state dot name. And what this is saying is take the value from the name property that exists in state and then put it in this h1. And that's what this is doing. Next, we're going to go to the description. So instead of having this hard-coded value here, we're going to simply put description, which would be, again, this dot state dot description. And this will render our description. And then in here, instead of all this text, we're simply going to render this dot state dot about. I believe we called it about, right? Yeah, it's about. And then in the stack here, we're going to put well, we have to replace this, guys. Okay, in order to render a UL, we would have to use a mapping method in JavaScript. Okay, so what we're going to need to do here is map over stack, which is represented by an array, extract each value, and then render it as a list item. So instead of these list items here, we're going to replace this with this snippet of code. And what this says, it maps over stack and then takes each technology and renders it in a list item. And now if we go ahead and save this, we can see that our app has re-rendered. And it's basically the same thing. But the difference here is that now all of our content is being pulled from the state. So it's not hard-coded, it's being pulled from the state. And the state is where you will be getting your data in React. Now the state can contain a content that came in from a sign-in, from someone who just signed in into your app or into your site. Or state could be data that's coming from any third-party API out there. And when it comes into your application, all the information that you would need to render on the screen has to be pulled from state. So this is the correct way to write state. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is one thing we did forget, guys, is that the image is not pulled dynamically. So here we still have, in the source, we still have this link. So instead of this link here, we're going to put profile pic. Let's go ahead and save. And it has broken. It says profile pic is not defined. Okay, let's take a look at this here. What did we call it? No, not profile pic, guys, but this dot state dot profile pic. this.state.profile pic. Let's go ahead and save. And profile pic is not defined. It still says that. Okay. What are we doing wrong? SRC. Oh. Let's see. Well, that is interesting. Reference error. 23. Okay, 23. That's the image source. Dot state profile pic. Profile pic. Let's go ahead and refresh. Oh, it's working. That was just a bug. Okay, guys. So now everything is pulled dynamically, including the image. Okay. All right. The next thing now. Okay. At the moment, our state is being defined inside our dev profile. Now, we might want that or we might not. Usually when you are building React applications, usually a state like sign in or something that needs to happen like in the very beginning stages of an application rendering to the screen. If you have a scenario like that, usually you want state to be defined in the app component, in the main one. And then once it's defined there, then it can be passed down to the other children components that are within the app. And the way to pass that information from the parent component to children component is what is called props. And that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to go into our dev profile here, and we're going to move our state to app.js instead of having the state here. So let's go ahead and cut this and then go into our app.js and drop our state right here. So now the information is going to be coming into the parent component. Now, how do we pass it from the parent component to the child component, which is dev profile? We pass it through props. And the way we can do that is, for example, down here, we can say, we can pass a prop down here. Now, for example, let's pass in profile pic. Okay? Let's go profile pic. And then in here, we're going to drop this particular URL. Now, what we're doing here, we're rendering this component and passing it a prop. And now in dev profile, it will have, no, we did forget one thing here, guys. We do have to have a constructor also in here. And the reason we need to have a constructor, I'm going to tell you in a sec. Let's call these super props here. It's because of this super props. Now, once we write super props, dev profile now can take in props. If we don't do this, it's not going to be able to take those props that are being passed to it by the parent component. So now it can take in props. And now, what did we pass it? We passed it the profile pic as a prop. So in here, instead of doing this.state.profile pic, we're going to do this.props. Because right now, we're getting the profile pic from the props, not from the state. So let's go ahead and save this and see if we break anything. Let's save both files. and it says props is not defined. This is in line 5 of our dev profile, line 5, super props. Interesting. Do we need to add anything here? Props is not defined, line 5. We got our constructor. Okay, let me debug this and I'll be right back, guys. What's going on here is, well, first we have a useless constructor. We don't really need this anymore because we're going to be setting state in our app and then passing it down as props. So we don't need this here. We can go ahead and get rid of it. And actually we need to replace all of these with props, or it's gonna always keep breaking in our app. Let's just pull it up here, refresh. Let's see where we are. Okay, so cannot read property name of null. And that's right here at the profile pick level. If we do this, good. And then it moved to cannot read property name of null, which is moved to 13. So basically what's going on, the profile is being passed through, but then now it's moving to name because it's now getting the name from the state. We need to change it to props. And we're going to do that for all of them. And then we'll take it, we'll see what happens then. Let's just change these to props first, okay? So let's go ahead, props here, okay, right here, and right here as well. Let's go ahead and save, see where we are so far. Fresh. Okay. No, not yet. Cannot read property of nulls. Property that's in dev 22. 22 right here. This dot, exactly, props right here. This would be this dot props dot, what are we mapping over? We're mapping over the stack. Right? Let's save this. Where are we so far? Where are we? Props. Okay, this dot props dot stack dot map. Okay. All right. Now, in here, guys, we need to pass all of our props. Okay, so we forgot a bit about that. Okay, so right now, all that's being passed in is the profile. Okay. We need to pass all the props, the profile pic, the name, the description, the about, and the stack. Let me go ahead and just grab this snippet of code here and replace it with this one right here. Okay, so now we have our dev component and it's passing in all the props that we have up here from state. Okay. Let's go ahead and save this. And here it is, guys. So it's working. So now the state is being defined in our app, which is the parent component. That's where state is being defined. And then it's being passed down to the child component, which is this here, dev profile. So we pass in these props, and then in our dev profile, we render it dynamically. So that is how you pass state from a parent component to all the other children in your React application. What we've looked at so far is how to create components, how to set their state, whether that's on the component level itself or set in state in the app or parent component, and then passing it down as props to the other children components. Now we're going to take a look at a different example that's not as static as just a landing page, It's going to be a counter example that has some logic that enables us to actually increase or decrease a counter. And it's an example that's also going to utilize building a component, setting its state, and also manipulating its state, which we're going to look at through the method called set state. So we're going to take a look at how to actually change our state. Yeah, let's just dive in. Jump back into our app.js and go ahead and delete everything except the div that we have here. And then let's go to the source folder. Well, before we do that, let's go ahead and put our counter component right here, because this is where we're going to render it. And then let's go to the source folder and create a counter component. And then in here, we're going to do our usual setup, which is we will import React as well as component. And then we will have our classic setup, the same way we've set up our app component. Except this will be called counter. And here for the class name, we don't need the class name for now. I'm going to go ahead and grab CSS that I've already made. Okay, let's look at it here. Okay, before we do that, also when you create a component, the convention is always to create also its CSS file. So we've just created counter.js. We're going to go ahead and also create counter.css. Okay? Counter.css. And then inside here, we're going to drop this particular CSS that I have. And then in counter, we're going to import our CSS file. Here we do, we just do basically counter.css. Okay? Yes, that should be fine. Let's just save. Okay. The next thing, hold on, let's pull up our application and see what we are looking at here. Okay, counter is not defined. This is app.js line 11. App.js line 11. Of course, because we have not imported the counter. Let's go ahead and do an import here. Counter from. That would be counter. Let's go ahead and save. I don't think we will see anything because there's nothing in counter. Let's first of all look at our errors. Unexpected token. That's line 12. Line 12 of our counter. Line 12. I think we need an extra thing here. Yep, there it is. Let's save. Counter does not contain a default export. Okay, we need to export our counter. So export default counter. Let's go ahead and save. Okay, module failed from the unexpected token. Okay, what are we looking at here? App counter. What are we doing in counter? Oh, we are rendering the counter component inside counter. That's why you see this crazy mistake here. Okay, let's change this to an H1 saying I am counter. Okay, it is compiling. Let's go ahead and refresh. Now working. So we can see our counter component being rendered on the screen. Now the first thing we want to do is create the state of our counter. So we're going to go up here and create state. And then right here, the state of our counter would normally just basically start at 0. So we're starting from a state of 0. And then here, instead of saying I am a counter, we're going to just put our state. And we do this dot state dot counter. Yeah. Let's go ahead and save. And here it is, guys. So it's representing our state on the screen. Okay, the next thing we want to do, we're going to create some buttons. And one will have a minus, and the other one is going to have a plus. These are the buttons that will enable us to increase and decrease the counter. Here we're going to put a plus sign. Let's go ahead and save, see how this is looking. Okay, so here it is, guys. So we're going to have two buttons. One will increment the counter, the other one will decrease the counter. And the point here is that when you're clicking on the plus button, it's going to increase the counter. That means it's going to change the state of the counter, which is at the moment 0. It's going to change it to be 1 or 5 or 10, depending on how much you're incrementing by. But this will actually manipulate our state. Be able to actually click the buttons and have the state actually change. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to create two functions. One is called increase counter, the other one is called decrease counter. And let me go ahead and grab the snippet of code here. Okay, so these are two functions that change our state. And the way you change state, like you don't do something like, for example, state, you say state.counter and then you try to change state directly. That's not how it's done. And actually that's a really bad practice, and it's part of what React is trying to avoid. So you use the setState method. So when you say this dot set state, this will go ahead and go into the current state, and then it will add 1 to it. And the same with the decrease counter function. It's going to go into the state, and it's going to decrease the current, whatever the current state is, it's going to decrease it by 1. And the increase counter goes in, sees whatever the state is right now, and it increases it by 1. And now that we've created these functions, we're going to give them here as onClicks. So we're going to say when, yeah, that's how you do it here. Okay. In here, we're just going to pass the increase. No, this one is the decrease. We're going to pass the decrease function. Decrease counter. And then in here, we will do the same, passing in increase. And now, if we save and go back in here, let's try it, and we click, it increases the counter. And if we click on the negative sign, it decreases the counter. So as you can see now, guys, we are able to actually manipulate our state. So in the past example, we simply saw that we were just getting data from our state, which was just static data, and then we were rendering it to the screen. In this particular example, we're looking at the ability to actually change that state, not only have it sit there static. So now we can increase the counter, and we can also decrease it. Now, an interesting thing here, we are not using props. There's basically no need to pass props anywhere. But an interesting thing I was thinking about, let's say the app here, let's say we want to pass a prop to counter, for example. What could we pass in here? We could perhaps pass a title, for example. Let's say we do title, and then title is going to say counter app, right? So let's pass it in as a prop here, and then in our counter we can do something like put something on top of here. In H1 that says counter app. And here, guys, made it look much nicer. And okay, so this is, I just wanted to add this in so that we can use props, but there's really no need to use props or pass them down from the parent component. But we've done it just to use props in this particular example, and it happens they made the application actually looks much nicer. So that's basically it in a nutshell, guys. So that's how you build components. You add state to them. Remember, you can add state at the component level, or you can add state to the parent component, which is usually that's how it's done. You define state in your app, and then you can distribute it to the other component children via props. So that's basically it in a nutshell, guys. We've looked at components, we've looked at using state, and we've looked at using props with mainly class-based components. Next up, we're going to be looking at functional components, and we will see React hooks for the first time and learn how to manage state in functional components. You will discover it's quite different from class-based components. We will be looking at React Lifecycle and see the different life cycles that a React component goes through, and then we will be looking at React events in more depth. I hope you're enjoying the tutorial so far. If you are, please hit the thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so that you can get more tutorials. Until next time, I will see you in part 2 of the React from Scratch tutorial. This is MJ on the journey back to Silicon Valley.